Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Stellium Astrology podcast. I'm Stephanie James, your host. And today I have astrologer Lianne McCafferty with me, who I met recently, just having a little chat online. And Leanne is an astrologer who also has a black belt in Shotokan karate, which I just love that. And you're an international astrologer, a lecturer, and you're a speaker and published writer. I've got here that you've written for the NCGR Geocosmic Journal, the Astrological Association Journal, and the Astrological Association Medical Newsletter. And you also are a tutor at the Mayo School of Astrology, aren't you?
I am. I'm quite busy.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah. So, what was interesting about us connecting was that you posted a picture of your workstation online. And actually, it was a really nice, I commented on the peacock, I think, because it was quite peacock-inspired. And the reason why was because just peacocks have been creeping into my consciousness for a while, and I've been quite interested in them, fascinated. And my little boy is also obsessed. And it was upon discussion that you informed me that they're connected to Juno. In astrology, well, in mythology, really. So that's really what got us talking, wasn't it? And just to add to this, I've checked my little boy's chart, and he's recently had Juno transit his sun, which is interesting that we would connect on this. But also, Juno is an area of interest for me, though I've not really done too much exploration. Because I have her in conjunction with my chart ruler, like it's really, really tight. So I've always thought, oh, that's interesting, but I've not really delved too deep. So I thought it would be a really fun learning experience for myself and for the listeners to have you come on the podcast and talk about Juno, because she's an area of research for you, isn't she?
Yeah, I'm absolutely fascinated with Juno, and I'm building up, sort of a bunch, like I've been doing a lot of research, but I'm trying to sort of build like a point of resource about Juno on my website. So there's now a dedicated Juno page, which I'm going to keep adding to as I go along. And I've done so many talks and written so much about Juno, and I'm absolutely fascinated. And she's exactly square my sun in my natal chart. She actually forms a T-square with my sun and Jupiter. So it makes sense that, I'm so fascinated, and I do a lot of work. But the more I learn and the more I delve into Juno, it's just so rich. There's so much to offer from Juno in the natal chart and mundane work as well. I use Juno in mundane work. And with all these asteroids and dwarf planets, we tend to box them off a little bit sometimes and think, they're sort of secondary to all the traditional planets. But I think the more they grow into our consciousness and the more we work with them, they have as much validity and I think potency in the natal chart in some cases. Juno is incredibly potent. But it was, I think when we have an interest in sort of a new exciting body in a chart, because we do go through phases, don't we, where we want to sort of explore some new things to put into the chart. And I think they always find us, either by transit or progression, that type of thing. And I remember I was, had a little bit of spare time, and I was like, oh, I want to explore some asteroids and, just sort of have a play around. I think I just got solar fire, actually. So I was like, enjoy it. It was like my new toy, playing with solar fire. And I realized I was having a Juno return. Okay. And Juno returns are fantastic. We can talk about them a little bit more later. So I just started sort of doing some research and seeing what Juno was doing in different charts, etc., etc. And it was 2020, I think. It's when we were all in lockdown, weren't we? It was, just awful. And Juno was in Libra at the time, but she was the only planet in one hemisphere of the chart. All the other planets were kind of bunched into a bit of a bowl, and Juno was the handle. And I remember looking, thinking, oh, she looks so lonely, just that singleton out there by herself. And, you know, the moon joining her once a month for a little bit of company. And I just thought, well, do you know what? We're all feeling that loneliness within our relationships. And, you know, I'm sure people that have heard of Juno maybe associate her with, you know, a marriage partner or long-term committed partner, that sort of thing. But there's a lot more to it. And I thought all of our relationships, whether business or personal or romantic, just whatever, we lost our rights, didn't we?
Yeah.
We took our rights to freely integrate within our relationships. And it was lonely, you know, and even if you were sort of in lockdown with a partner or children or, you know, what have you, there was still that degree of loneliness and being completely separated.
And that's, I think, is it March of 2020? That was when Saturn entered Aquarius. So he would have been trying to Juno as well. So you would have had that kind of, not only is she singled out on her own, but also Saturn feeding in, creating that added isolation, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the dynamics within our relationships changed so much, didn't they? And I don't think they've all gone back to what they were pre-COVID.
No, it's funny as well, because there were people who literally got together at the beginning of the pandemic and it threw people into relationships because they were like, well, we want to be together, so let's move in together. And then there's people that discovered it's kind of like that make or break period of going on a holiday where you're suddenly somewhere where you can't really escape and you just have to deal with it. So there were people that realized that they just had to break up, but it kind of intensified the living situation. So we had to make definitive decisions about what we wanted from our future, our immediate future, without much, maybe not too much consideration for the long term, just because the long term felt so like the immediate moment felt so slow and dragging. The bigger picture just felt like it was so far off. You know, it's such a strange time, like emotionally. I've spoken to so many people as well, like not to digress too much, but just about how it really felt like time was warped during the pandemic, and it was not normal. We didn't experience time in its normal sort of relativity. It was more that, you know, it felt like it dragged more than anything has ever dragged ever, but at the same time it flew. It was like the weirdest time. But yes, relationships were really like a major player in that, weren't they? Huge.
They were a huge point of focus, and I think we had to renegotiate a lot of terms within our relationship, you know, because a lot of them went online, so we lost that physical connection. And then, you know, if you were in lockdown with people, you kind of had to renegotiate your own space, that type of thing. So there was a lot of adjustment, I think, without a doubt, during that time. And then, of course, we discovered sort of new ways of, you know, running our relationships or interacting within our relationships. And yeah, there was a lot of change. And it wasn't just personal relationships, it was, you know, our relationship with the government as well. And authority, of course, you know, if we sort of go back to Saturn. You know, so there was a lot going on, wasn't there?
I think as well, you know, if you think about the relationship we have with social media and the people on the other end of that. So, you know, like I always think about one particular client of mine who was having an interesting career-defining transit. And during the pandemic, she suddenly got 120,000 followers on Twitter. And it was like, if you think about Juno, perhaps in Libra being a way that we kind of express ourselves through sort of an artistry in a way, and just that there was a new platform for us to be creative. I mean, I think every sign has its ability to be creative, but I think with Libra there's some sort of added artistry to life and the experience. And you know, with Juno being there, it could well be that it was about, you know, on the dark side of Libra, like that kind of charming borderline narcissism that can be there. But at the same time, you know, there's this like real attractive quality about it. And just I don't know much about Juno anyway, so we're going to get into the details, but just you mentioning Juno and Libra and thinking about that period in time, there's just so much about how we're related to the world around us, the people in our lives, and on social media, and like you said, the government as well. I mean, wow.
That's just... but it was very much about recalibrating ourselves. But of course, Libra's an air sign, so again, we were conducting, you know, all our communications within relation. Well, a lot was, you know, online again. So you know, you mentioned your friend with that, you know, all those sort of new followers, that type of thing. It's about the communication there as well. So
exactly. So how fast does Juno move? Because I've been keeping my eye on her, and she seems to travel sort of a mercurial speed. I don't know, is that
not quite. So if you think about where Juno is, so she's in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. So Jupiter's a husband in myth, and Mars is one of her children. So she's in between those. So she moves a bit slower than Mars, and obviously faster than Jupiter. So around 4.4 years to sort of make a full orbit.
Oh wow!
So probably about double, sort of half the speed of Mars type thing. Mars takes 2 years to orbit. So around 2 to 3 months in a sign. But Juno's orbit's elliptical, so it spends more time in one sign sometimes than others, depending if it's, you know, apogee or perigee to the Earth. Retrogrades around every 18 months. For around, I don't know, 3 to 4 months at a time. So sometimes Juno can spend up to a year in one sign. So I think, it's incredible.
So she seemed to be flying through Cancer. Every time I looked, I was like, wow, she's speeding through here.
Yeah, I've got a list here. So 2023, where we are now. This year, Juno will be in Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, and Virgo. So she must be perigee. She must be really close to the Earth at that point of the orbit. But in 2021, she was in Sagittarius for 11 months. So she retrograded. So, you know, it's not a regular cycle to follow.
That's interesting. It's much more... It's much more sort of, well, social in some, at some parts it's more social than it is. So this is why you're interested in the mundane as well, because she's slower in certain areas, so she's going to have a much more all encompassing influence that would, you know, affect maybe not necessarily a generation, but definitely like a social group
definitely as without a doubt. You know, virtually everyone born in 2021 will have Juno in Sagittarius. I think she moved into Capricorn in the December 21. So, but if you think back to 2021 as well, you know, we were still sort of experiencing some lockdowns. Politics was just crazy. But if you think back to one particular incident, okay, this is really quite Sagittarius, and there was so much spin being put on everything by the UK government, wasn't there? But do you remember when Dominic Cummings took that drive up to Barnard Castle with his family? Okay.
I was talking to someone about this the other day.
Okay. Now, he's a really Sagittarius person. Okay. He's full of spin, absolutely full of it. And then he got to Barnard Castle, and then the next day had a drive to a beauty spot saying that he had to test his eyesight. Do you remember that? But it was just blag, wasn't it? Everyone just could see through that it was just complete rubbish. And Boris Johnson was supporting him. He was putting a load of spin on it, you know. And we're all sat there going, do you really think we're so stupid as to believe all of this? And of course, Juno sees through everything. She doesn't miss a trick. She cuts through and sees through everything. And if I quickly tell you the myth about that kind of supports that. So obviously she's Jupiter's wife and queen consort. And we know Jupiter was a, you know, philanderer, always having affairs and indulging in, pleasures of the flesh, that type of thing.
Yeah.
But Juno was a loyal wife and, consort. But Jupiter had an affair with Juno's handmaiden Io, okay? And Juno found out about this and was so jealous, all right? But Jupiter had tried to conceal the affair, okay? Disguised himself as a cloud or a fog and disguised Io as a cow. But Juno wasn't stupid. She completely saw through that. So she demanded that Jupiter gift her the cow, which was Io in disguise, all right? So Jupiter was really upset that his bit on the side had been, taken away. And in the meantime, Juno had placed the cow under the watchful eyes of Argos, the giant with 100 eyes. And he never closed all of his eyes at the same time. He always left, one or two open. So Jupiter sent Mercury along to distract Argos. Mercury took his lyre and was playing music, and Argos fell asleep and was actually killed in the process. So Io escaped. Juno was seething, really, really angry. So she sent a fly to bite and torment the cow, Io, for all eternity. So Jupiter was now all repentant, so, fell on sort of bended knees, begging for forgiveness and promising that he'd never sort of see Io again. Juno, being the loyal wife, forgave Jupiter and set Io free, took the fly away, took the torment away. So she demonstrates the loyalty and the forgiveness and the compromise that comes with a long-term relationship. And, but also, she could see through the disguise. She could see through that fog. And what she did, she was, grief-stricken that Argus was killed. So she took his eyes, the 100 eyes, and placed them on the tail of the peacock, which was her sacred bird. So the peacock sees everything with eyes everywhere. Okay, you cannot pull the wool over Juno's eyes. It's about all the nitty-gritty reality that comes with a committed relationship, whether that's personal, marriage, or business, or just something contractual. It's about all, the nitty-gritty and, the give and take that comes with that, and warts and all, isn't it? Venus doesn't want to see all the unpleasantness, it wants to sort of look a bit through rose-tinted glasses, doesn't it? Wants everything to be beautiful and perfect. But Juno knows that that's not what long-term relationships are like, So I did think it was really funny when Dominic Cummings said he was testing his eyesight, because I was just like, that's so Juno. And just from memory, he was having a really strong Juno transit at the time.
Was he?
Yeah, I can't quite remember what it was, but I was just like, yeah. And the way they were trying to sort of treat us as though we were all stupid. The general public could see through all the blag that was coming, out of 10 Downing Street. And look what's happening now, of course, there's still evidence, sort of being pulled together in the inquiry. Boris Johnson was found guilty of, how many misdemeanors, and then trying to hide the WhatsApp app messages, trying to hide his phone. It's so like Jupiter concealing his affair and disguising himself, trying to hide it. And we're like, we are not stupid. That is just Juno in a nutshell, really.
Yeah, that is. I love the comparison to the political situation, because there's so much coming out now, and we could. I mean, I'm quite angry about the parties, the videos that I've seen, and I've mentioned it before on the podcast because it's some people I know are very party politics, and they're like, quite happy to vote for anybody as long as they're a Tory. And I have at times raised this issue of, well, they were partying, while people were saying goodbye to their loved ones and weren't even allowed to visit them or even touch them or anything. And to me, I can't understand how anybody could forgive that kind of deception, which was not only a lie, but was actually like telling people they don't have certain freedoms to connect with the people that are, the people that they love, like family members, friends, like people you're never going to see again. You know, some people, they're never ever going to see them again. I myself lost my grandmother, not to COVID, but she passed away during you know, all the restrictions and that, and you know, we couldn't really go, I was also pregnant, so I couldn't go and visit her and stuff. And so when I see these videos, it really does really make me angry. You know, like it really but you know, they just laugh it off now, don't they? And they think it's just well, they're trying to play it down and say that it wasn't quite what it was, when it very clearly bad behavior, very bad behavior. So yeah, that's one of the things that's kind of surfacing as a result of everything that happened during that period, which was astrologically extremely interesting. You know, without even knowing what was going on, astrologers were totally fixated on 2020 for quite a while, weren't they? You know, we were all like, what's going to happen? And a few ideas were going around. But obviously, as you mentioned, people kind of like to have the asteroids to sort of look at every now and again, but don't sort of consider the impact that they actually could have. And one of the things, just before we get on to looking at it in a bit more detail, but one of the things that adds interest for me is the fact that Juno was in an air sign, and then we had this whole transition with the Saturn Pluto conjunctions going into air for like the next 200 years, and there was just suddenly a big shift into air, wasn't there? There was other stuff and I just can't for the life of me remember now, but there's just such a huge emphasis on that shift. So interesting that Juno was also reiterating that in some way.
Well, she was, and she was really key in those two conjunctions. So we had the Saturn Pluto conjunction in January, didn't we? Was it 22 Capricorn? Juno, I think it was 22 Capricorn.
It was, so the Jupiter, the Saturn Pluto was at 22 Capricorn, yes, in January. Yes, that's right, the 12th of January,
Yeah, Juno was square that. Okay. Yeah, and then all our rights were taken away. We had no rights to connect with people at all. They were all taken away. Okay. You know, all the rights that, you know, we took for granted just in our daily lives, being able to sort of get out and about, make people go to work, they just disappeared overnight almost, didn't they? You know? Then if we think about the air mutation, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, that was at 0 Aquarius. So we're really getting into, you know, that new era of air. Juno was exactly sextile that. She was at 0 Sag. So she was sort of really key in that. And I think one of the big things we're seeing as we move into the future with that shift into Aquarius, which Pluto, of course, now is sort of intensifying. Of course, Pluto is moving backwards and forwards over that 0 Aquarius, isn't it? You know, another year or so. And it's triggering that degree of that Jupiter-Saturn mutation. And I think we're seeing a lot about human rights, gender rights, how we identify ourselves in society. You know, so I think Juno there is highlighting how we value women, minorities, you know, the various gender identifications. It's very much about valuing them and making sure that everyone has equal rights, no matter if they're a woman or, you know, no matter what color they are or sex they are or, you know, sexual orientation they are. It's about everyone's rights coming out of a very patriarchal Capricorn earthy phase.
Definitely. I definitely think that there's something to that, and it's interesting as well because this just currently Venus is retrograde, Lilith is very intrinsic to this process, and I've done a lot of work because I've been very interested in Lilith, and she is kind of when we were talking before, we were saying that she's a little bit like the antithesis of that. They kind of like cancel each other out almost. Like Juno is almost like very like forgiving, and there's like a compassion there, and she's like, okay, we can work through this, whereas Lilith is quite unforgiving. and
Absolutely.
she throw the baby out with the bathwater. She's just like, I'm done. And it's not aggressive or anything. It's just there's a firm boundary, I think, with Lilith. It's interesting. There's some kind of boundary with her, but with Juno, I suppose the boundary differs in some way.
Juno's very much about trying to maintain the status quo, and then renegotiating a new status quo, if you like. She's always trying to find that balance within relationships. And, you know, the word balance just does not fit with Lilith at all.
No.
You know, there's no balance with Lilith. It's just black and white. It's like, I'm not tolerating that anymore. Just no.
Yes.
Whereas Juno's very much, Juno's great for, you know, finding solutions, troubleshooting, working through problems. That's nothing to do with Lilith, is it? No way. So yeah, and actually, if you look at Juno's discovery chart, you can see so many of those themes within the chart.
So Juno's this little thing here that's like a little, looks like one of those little dandelion things, you know, the ones that you blow. Things, the seedlings come off. At 2 Aries at the Discovery. So the Discovery chart is the 1st of September 1804. And I'm guessing this is an approximate time then. 2200 hours. And that's LMT in Lilienthal, Germany.
Yeah, that's it. You can find it on astro.com.
And I'll link the chart details in the description anyway. So okay, so this little glyph is Juno. So what are your thoughts and feelings about this discovery chart?
Okay, so we've got Juno in Aries. She's full of fire. She's really, really proactive and really action orientated. And when working with Juno in the chart, I often treat her like Mars. She's like a trigger. She's full of energy. She's like a catalyst. You know, we can be having some sort of bigger outer planet transits, and then we just need Mars to come along and, you know, trigger it. So Juno acts like that. Very cardinal. If you look, she's in a grand cardinal cross there with Mars, a Libra stellium, and Chiron up there in Capricorn. So, lots of crises. You know, life being married to Jupiter wouldn't be easy, would it? You can imagine there being lots of drama and lots of crises.
It'd be like an episode of EastEnders or something.
Exactly. And but I often find people with grand crosses that they're familiar with that crisis and they're great troubleshooters. You know, they can find solutions. They can work through. You know, but I think they can be multi-talented as well. They're multi-challenged, perhaps, but multi-talented as well. So Juno's great for problem solving, definitely.
I'm thinking you're saying that she's got like a Mars feel about her, but do you think that's because she's constantly angry at Jupiter for, you know, like there's this kind of like brewing resentment that's constantly underlying because she knows he's off flirting with whatever's blinking at him.
Quite possibly, but then if we talk about Juno's got several epithets or roles or sort of different versions, different faces, okay? And one of those is Juno Curitis, which is warrior Juno. She's always seen with a sword and a shield. And Curitis is derived from curis, which means spear. So that's Aries Juno, okay? She's very much a warrior as well, okay? And then we've got Juno Sospita, who is savior of Rome, protector of home, protector of people's rights, you know. We've got Mars and Cancer there, which I think fits that quite well there. Okay, you know, she's very much about protecting the people of Rome, or people in general. So, you know, when I look at Juno in mundane astrology, she always represents the rights of the people of a particular country or organization, or, you know, whatever mundane chart you're looking at. but we can sort of discuss that a bit
Well,
more
you said as well
later.
she's like the queen consort, didn't you, as well?
Yeah.
And it feels like, you know, with, you know, the sign of Cancer is kind of like the you know, like a patriotic sign, isn't it? And it's kind of perhaps it's like a kind of a carer of the land, the kingdom type feeling. I mean, there's that moon in Leo that kind of pairs with that as well. So
well, it is. There's a matriarchal feel, isn't there? Because
yes, yeah.
Juno's in that lovely fire trine to Venus
Mm.
and perhaps the moon. We're not quite sure because of we don't have the exact time. But a very
No.
patriarchal feel, and it's very much about sort of keeping home fires burning, I think. But it's about feminine courage, feminine pride, and sort of defending all that's important to you. You know, that type of thing. There's a strong feminine principle running through that with that fire trine and that Mars and Cancer, definitely. And then of course we've got that Libra stellium, you know, Saturn, Mercury, and Uranus. Juno has a lot of political influence. She's a diplomat as well. Okay, she can be manipulative when she wants as well. And if we go into a sort of a Greek myth, and we go into Juno's Greek alternative, which is Hera and Zeus. So Hera was really angry at Paris. You know, this is sort of around the Trojan War because he didn't choose her as being the most beautiful out of Athena and Aphrodite. So she split the dummy a little bit and took the side of the Greeks. And because she wanted to sort of influence the outcome of the war, you know, she wanted a little bit of revenge, okay? She took Zeus up to the top of Mount Ida, seduced him, beguiled him, he fell asleep, and then this allowed the rest of the gods to interfere with the outcome of the Trojan War. And Jupiter had sort of strictly said, you know, the gods were not to get involved in the Trojan War. But Juno kind of manipulated that situation. So she has a lot of political influence and power and can be quite beguiling when needed. And I often think, you know, an example I use, it's like, you know, anyone that's been in a long-term relationship, perhaps, they're very much about not rocking the boat or upsetting the apple cart too much, okay? And people find little ways to get around their partner, don't they? Okay.
Yes.
So it's like if someone goes shopping and buys something really, really expensive, and they get home and they either hide it at the back of the wardrobe or tell their partner, "Oh, it's nothing, I got it in the sale." There's no real harm to this there. But
I have to say, my mum is terrible for doing that.
Exactly, yeah. I do think there's a bit of Juno there because, you know, she'll think, well, do you know what? Jupiter gets away with that. My little thing that I'm getting away with is nothing, you know. But I do think, you know, long-term relationships, partners do turn a blind eye to some things, don't they? You know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think the thing is, when you're in a long-term relationship, there's in your head how you want things to be, and then there's the reality of what they are.
Which
and
is
you
Juno.
have to yes, and you have to say, it's almost like saying, well, they're only human. You have to at some point sort of scale back your expectation and say, well, you know, we're all just human here, and we're trying our best. Maybe this might be a part of the Neptune here, and maybe Lilith. I'm just talking about a couple of people that I know who have been in quite long-term relationships with people who they've had really, really fruitful connections, and it's very spiritually based. So they are having human experience, but they're respecting the spiritual aspect of that person's soul in this relationship. And a couple of them have decided that they have found themselves attracted to people outside the relationship, and they have given permission for that person to explore what that means for them by, you know, actually committing the act of, you know, adultery, I suppose, outside of the relationship, in order to fulfill that side of themselves, because in the long-term relationship, that aspect of their relationship has dwindled somewhat. And, you know, perhaps maybe there is this open-mindedness or this understanding with Juno that, okay, as we get older, there's the physical side that might, you know, fall away, but spiritually, you know, there is a side of us, you know, the argument is that men need that, but there's a modern argument that says that sex is not a necessity. We don't need it to function. It's just a desire. And there's a big argument through a lot of the sort of feminist and equality circles who are saying that no matter how much you think it's an entitlement, you shouldn't have to pursue it. However, you know, speaking from perhaps a patriarchal perspective, may be it may be that you know, part of Lilith and Neptune being here is the understanding of the kind of the change in the attraction in some way, because Lilith is there's some sort of magnetism with Lilith. I think there's some kind of
very sexual. I think
it's in many expressions, but sexuality is definitely one of them. And in Scorpio, there's a real sense of I mean, it really intensifies that kind of magnetism and that sexuality, but also it creates a very strong all or nothing feeling about it. So it's like you know, there's almost this kind of like glamour and mystery about potentially other people, and kind of waking up to that, which you can have, you know. On one of my posts I posted about Neptune, and we shared you shared one of your Neptune stories, your Neptune square, and it's like there's something, it's so funny because Neptune is this wonderfully glamorous, dreamlike, ethereal transit. It can be, but there's some sort of bump to reality with it as well, isn't there?
There always is at the end of it, when the fog clears, you know.
Yes, and you suddenly go, whoa.
Exactly. How was I so stupid?
Yeah.
But I think as well, you know, Jupiter was always drawn back to Juno. He always come back, which describes that magnetism. Always can't live without sort of magnetism.
You can't live with them, can't live without them. That's great. And that does feel very Juno, doesn't it? It's like those couples that got married, divorced, then got married again. You know, there's that real, it's like the undying bond almost.
Yeah, very much so. But I think as well with Lilith there, it's about choosing what you're prepared to tolerate versus what you're not prepared to tolerate. So, for example, Jupiter's affair with Io, which is too close to home because it was Juno's handmaiden. She couldn't cope with it. She was really jealous. But I think Juno had multiple affairs, and Juno probably turned a blind eye to some of them because, you know, they didn't, I don't know, they didn't trigger her perhaps so much. So it's about what you're prepared to tolerate in a relationship.
Yeah, I think so.
Definitely. And that's where I think all the Libra energy comes in here as well. It's just like weighing up what you're prepared to put up with.
So do you think that there's like, so we've got Jupiter here, you just mentioning, look, they're both in Mars ruled signs as well, traditionally Mars rules Scorpio. So, and they're, you know, partile work, so like a exact, what's the aspect here? What are we looking at? Is it it's not a quincunx, is it? It's a,
no,
yes, it is, isn't it? Is it?
I don't know, your settings are a bit different to what I'm used to.
Is it?
It might be a sesqui quadrat, is it? Oh no, it must be a quincunx. No, it has to be a quincunx.
Hang on a sec.
The exact
grid. Jupiter and Juno, yes, it is.
Yeah, so
it's quite tight, isn't it?
Yeah, so there's like some underlying discomfort there, isn't it? You know, underlying discomfort.
They say that it can, in a relationship, a quincunx can be quite nice because it is almost like where they raise your awareness to something you're completely blind to. So it can work in that respect. But it is a little bit chalk and cheese, the feeling, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it can just be like that underlying itch or irritation that you can't quite put your finger on, because that the quincunxes are quite an unconscious energy, you know, unless you sort of actively work on that underlying thing that you just, you know. So yeah, I don't know, but looking at all that Scorpio energy as well, Juno is very connected with money. So we've got another epithet of Juno, which is Juno Moneta, and that's her as like financial or a monetary protector. You know, she had coins minted in temples dedicated to her in ancient Rome. She was so highly revered in ancient Rome. She was really elevated. And she was actually part of the Capitoline triad with Jupiter and Minerva. So way up there, you know, in the value system of sort of political and social life in Rome at those times. But I think, you know, of course, when we're talking about committed relationships, there's always that financial dynamic as well, isn't there? That Scorpio 8th house stuff that you have to deal with. Some couples seem to work that really well. Some couples really struggle with the balance of power within their joint finances, you know, which is a very Scorpio thing. So, but also Juno Moneta, Moneta's derived from Maneri, which means to warn or alert. And I think this is where Juno can penetrate through and see the truth and see the warning signs, whether that's a gut feeling or just some sort of knowing, which is very Scorpionic as well, isn't it? You know, that radar that just says, no, this is a load of rubbish. This isn't right. This just is not right. And that's a little bit like a quincunx as well, isn't it? Just this isn't quite right, and I'm not quite sure why, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. But also possibly to do with the fact that there's this lovely water. I say lovely, it's what is it, Pluto, Mars and Jupiter in a trot where, you know, it's I don't know if it's necessarily a grand trine, but they're definitely in communication, aren't they? So there's a lot of water here, really.
It's a grand trine, it is. It's very intuitive, very instinctive, very feminine. All those feminine sort of introverted passive energies, isn't it? That type
and often with that kind of presence, there's can be a sort of symbiosis in a relationship as well, can't there? Like there's a sort of, you scratch my back, I scratch yours, you know. And you can overlook a lot of red flags just because it's comfortable. You know, you don't want to, you know, push too hard. You don't want to upset the balance, really.
You don't, and you know, therefore you end up overlooking certain things or turning that blind eye. But you know, water trines, they can be really sort of private and protective as well. And of course, Juno is very much about protecting the balance that is within that relationship, which is what you've just described, really. And you know, you'll sort of perhaps you know, just put a couple of things to one side in order to protect the bigger picture, the bigger long term
damage limitation.
Very much so. But I do think with that Scorpio energy there as well, that's where Jupiter has a bit of a sting in. Sorry, Juno. There's a sting in the tail. She will get a little bit of revenge.
And then you've got the Sun in Virgo opposite Pluto as well, which adds to that sort of like crisis dynamic.
Well, absolutely, and it's about the division of power in relationships, isn't it? And sometimes, well, in a lot of relationships, there is an imbalance there.
It's really nice, isn't it, to be able to look at a discovery chart for an asteroid that's, you know, that we can actually pinpoint, because obviously we don't know the origin or the discovery of Venus or the moon. You know, they're always visible, they're always there, and there's no real record of when they were discovered as such. So we can't look at what they represent in an astrological pattern. We can just talk about the mythology and we can figure it out in our own lives and look at it. But with this, you can almost say, wow, look, this is really a very clear picture of what Juno can represent in a relationship.
It does, and it tells Juno's story as well. You know, I'm just, you know, looking at that Libra stellium again. That's Juno Regina. She's, you know, that's Queen Consort. You know, it's all about the committed long-term relationships and the balance of power within the. But any relationship has to go through cycles of renewal. You know, they go through stale phases, then kind of work through something and enter a new phase. So there's something very cyclical here. You know, relationships are cyclical. They do have ups and downs. So it's always about renegotiating the terms within that relationship. And that Libra stellium, I think it's always sort of thinking, right, come on, how do we move forward? You know, how do we progress? How do we stop this getting stale? It's very much Saturn Uranus, isn't it? You know, if you think that we're approaching a new Saturn Uranus cycle there, it's only 11 degrees away from being exact. So it's sort of it's quite progressive there, I think, and it's just about moving into a new status quo, and sort of balancing everything that works, you know, maintaining the functioning structure, which is very Saturn, and then sort of bringing in something new, which is the Uranus. And you have to do that with relationships in order for them to keep growing, I think.
Definitely. It's interesting, isn't it? It's like thinking, I know that I'm speaking to somebody later on who actually has got this in their chart, Saturn Uranus conjunction, and just how they're kind of they're here to disrupt the status quo in a way. And you know, when things are completely out of sorts, and you know, things feel completely out of control, they're also quite a good grounding force in that respect as well. They can be one or the other, you know, and they can sort of flip between the two. But it's just funny how it's to see Juno as having that kind of expression. It really does describe that kind of I'm an avid reader of I've always been this way. I think it must be my Aquarius stellium. I love reading problem pages, and I love reading problem solution. And at the moment I'm addicted to AITA, which is Am I the Arsehole articles. I am so addicted to them. I just can't stop reading them. And with social media, you get everybody's opinion, and they go, yep, definitely you are because of XYZ, or no, this is unfair because of. And it's funny because I've always thought that would be you know, I've got like Pluto and Libra, but you know, I'm also, my chart ruler is in conjunction with Venus, but knowing that Juno's in there too, it's almost like this, the mediator, and kind of like, this is kind of like, really, you know, Uranus is very much about fairness and equality in its own way. And like, you know, we've talked about tolerance. It's about what we're not prepared to tolerate anymore, and what we can put up with to a certain degree. And this is, you know, they're both about boundaries, Saturn and Uranus, but in different ways. So it's, you know, it's an interesting to see that Juno has that such a strong sort of like equality signature, even though there's you know, this kind of, like you said, there's a kind of negotiation, and it's kind of like the damage limitation. It's like she commits for the long haul, and then it's like figuring out what's worth getting angry about. Somebody else I know who's always saying, pick your arguments, you know, like pick your battles. It's very Juno.
Is it really worth telling your partner you just spent £200 on a pair of shoes? Do they really need to know? That type of thing. But I think because we've got that Aries Libra axis so highlighted, it's about being prepared to fight for the relationship. You know, we've got Aries there, and actually, if you think about the time that Juno was discovered, you know, early 18th century, we had the Napoleonic Wars going on then, didn't we? So that's very Aries, that's very martial. And then we've got Libra, we had like the Romanticism period with all, you know, beautiful art and that type of thing. So it's just about fighting for, you know, what's beautiful in a relationship. Perhaps it's just as simple as that. And, you know, And
there is something very beautiful about being I'm not just talking about romantic relationships, but like when you're friends with somebody, or you've been, you know, connected to somebody for such a long time, and looking back, and sometimes even through the highs and the lows, and the things that they've done that upset you, and the things that, you know, you've done together that were wonderful, there's something about that period of, you know, long-term commitment to that person that is actually quite special, very special. maybe Juno's the patron saint of anniversaries.
She is, because she's, yeah, that's a really great sort of concept, because I really do think, you know, when I was talking about Juno returns, which are around, you know, every 4.5 years,
Yeah.
I really do think they're signposts or crossroads in a relationship. They're really great times to really sort of just take a step back and think, where's this relationship going? Is it a bit stale? Does it need some, you know, fun and energy and some excitement injected into it? You know, where are you going from here in a relationship? It's like, you know, someone who gets married or whatever, and then with their partner they decide to have kids. That's a massive signpost in a relationship, and that completely changes the dynamics of a relationship once
it does.
You know,
yeah, you know, it's funny because there's a general rule that if you're with somebody for 5 years and they don't propose or you don't get married, then, you know, they're just wasting your time, basically. So it kind of ties up with that time period. Not that I necessarily believe that, but, you know, it's just, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's quite interesting.
Just one more thing I wanted to mention about this. This is the final Juno set that I wanted to mention, which is Juno Lucina, which is quite different to what we've just been discussing. And Juno Lucina is bringer of light, like a vital life force, protector of women in labour, protector of women in general, and the feminine principle, which is very Mars and Cancer, I think. And you often see a strong Juno in the charts of midwives.
Interesting.
Yeah. And if we sort of go right back into the origins of Juno's name, it's derived from the Latin adorably, which means to aid, to benefit. And then another extension of that, which I can't pronounce, it's benefic, which means to rejuvenate. And there's a very cyclical feel about that. You know, it's very lunar, it's very Cancer, isn't it? Rejuvenating, and relationships need to be rejuvenated as well. But think about the peacock's plumage. You know, that's constantly being rejuvenated. And actually, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but alchemists, including Jung, I think I did, didn't I? Or didn't, I don't know. They associate the peacock with renewal and, you know, sort of cyclical situations. And I do, I do think with Jupiter being the greater benefic, you know, Juno is his wife, consort, partner. You know, she's got to have some sort of benefic role, I think, but even some form of divine providence, perhaps. Some sense of foresight and prudence. There's something very, very intuitive and sensitive about Juno, I think. And I think I told you this last time, and I've started doing some more research on this actually. So I had a few years ago, I had an accident, and I was very lucky to come out of it. I should have either been dead or really, really seriously injured. And I got away with just some sort of being battered and bruised, and, you know, broken ribs, that type of thing. And you know, what do you do as an astrologer? You always pull up the chart and things like that, don't you? You know, it's our way of helping to make sense of them. And for years, I just couldn't kind of see anything that was sort of made me go wow about the chart. There was some Saturn, Mars Saturn stuff. Yeah, it was an accident. But what was special about that, I always thought, you know what, I don't know how I walked away from that, because I did walk away. And during the accident, I felt something. I don't know whether it was a present or there was just something that kind of protected me. And I can't describe it any better than that. I really can't. And it wasn't until recently I just revisited that chart, put Juno in, and the moment of the accident, Juno was exactly on my sun.
Wow.
Yeah, on my natal sun. And I was like, aha. And then I started looking back at other sort of near misses or traumatic experiences in my life. And the other major one was when my son was born. We were both really, really lucky to survive it. You know, it turned into a proper emergency. Juno was right on top of my eighth house Pluto during the birth.
Wow.
So, you know, I really do think that there's something about Juno being that forces, divine providence, or, you know, beneficial energy. So it would be amazing if anyone has any similar stories to sort of hear them, because I'm trying to build a little bit of a database on them. And actually, I've sort of started going through some celebrities charts, and we know Madonna recently was found sort of really ill at home. She had a terrible infection, ended up in ICU, and she said she's really, really lucky to be alive. Okay, so you know, one of those similar experiences, like, wow, I'm lucky to be here. So I checked out her chart, and the day that she was found unconscious, transit Juno was exactly sextile her natal Juno and Pluto, which are in the 12th. Wow. Trine Neptune as well. She was rescued, wasn't she? She was literally rescued. Wow. Juno was trine her progressed ascendant, and transit Neptune was opposite progressed Juno. So Juno was all over Madonna that day. Wow. And yeah, and then you know, Jeremy Renner, the actor who was in the Marvels movies. Yes, I don't know if you know or not. Yeah, so he had that accident with the snowplow when he was run over by a snowplow at the beginning of the year, and he was really, really lucky to survive. I think nearly every bone in his body was broken. Wow. I checked that chart out. Juno was right on top of his natal Saturn, which is in Taurus in the second house, opposite Mars. And you must have had a really strong body, you know, with Saturn and Taurus opposite Mars, to survive. But Juno was right on top of that, conjunct that day. So
I'm so curious now to see Ozzy Osbourne. I don't know if we've got it. I haven't got it, I don't think. But just because you remember when he had that quad biking accident, and they were like, "Oh, you're not dead."
Yeah,
he might be an interesting one to look at.
Definitely.
Have you looked at not relating to accidents and stuff, but just at Queen Camilla's chart with Juno, just because she's obviously the Queen Consort, so I just wondered whether or not
that
there was but no, that is so fascinating, because there's as beautiful as they say, you know, being pregnant, carrying a child, and you know, birthing new life is this miracle. It is actually, you know, not to be dark about it, but it's incredibly risky time, because you are growing new life inside you. At any point, something could go wrong.
Yeah.
And, you know, it puts not just one life at risk, but two. And, you know, it's just one of those things that I guess, you know, I'm aware of it, because not only have I become a mum myself, I know loads of them. And I've heard in-depth stories about childbirth, and there's, you know, it's not textbook, is it? Like, anything could happen. You don't know what's going to happen. It's literally, you know, like a Russian roulette almost, with how things are going to happen. And it's very interesting to think that almost of Juno as like a kind of a midwife, a soul midwife, kind of like a guardian angel experience.
Absolutely. I really, really do believe that. So just need more stories, and, you know, more of those sort of experiences to explore.
I'll have to ask some of my mummy friends, but also I'm sure there's plenty of people listening who've either had those kind of accidents or experiences, or have had children themselves and have had complications in childbirth. What about during pregnancy as well? Because you know, there's does Juno sort of oversee that aspect as well, do you feel? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I think so. It's not something I've really studied by itself, but, you know, if you look at Juno Lucina, you know, she does protect women in general, and, you know, midwives protect us throughout the pregnancy, don't they? We're in contact with our midwives, you know, not just at the birth, but throughout.
Yes.
So yeah, I think that would make a lot of sense, and yeah, I can go away and have a look at that, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, and a profession I think that would be very much connected to this, though not necessarily having to be a midwife, is like a doula. You know, there's lots of people who are trained in being a companion through pregnancy and childbirth. And you know, it's like, it's not just because the thing is, you think of, like, when you think of it, I know I'm talking about my previous self as not being a mum, thinking about pregnancy, it was like this, like, kind of beautiful thing where you get this cute bump, and you know, like, you just, like, you're glowing, your skin's glowing, but there's really is the good, the bad, and the ugly about it, because like all sorts of like gross stuff starts happening, and you just feel horrible. Well, I know I felt really gross, and you know, there's just, you know, the way that you know when something's not right is often because there's, like, you know, bleeding or something like that, and it's just not pretty. You know, it's just not a pretty time like they tell you it's going to be. So again, this is interesting that Juno it's about like that kind of that long-term commitment and being prepared to put up with the good, the bad, and the ugly. You know,
the
like,
reality of being pregnant is very different to what's written in what's books and what's glamorized. And it's bizarre though, because I think different women feel differently about pregnancy. You know, I know someone who's got 4 kids, and she used to cry every time she had a baby because she missed the bump so much. She just loved being pregnant so much. And then I love being pregnant, but I worked throughout, and I was working on the day I went into labour, and I just could not wait to meet my baby and get rid of the bump and sort of get back to, you know.
I was the same as you. I was just like, I remember like 2 weeks before he was early as well. He came 5 days early, but I remember about 2 weeks before thinking, I don't know how I'm going to carry on like this. I just don't know. And like, I was sleeping on the sofa because it was only good sleep I could get, because otherwise I would turn and I would be in a weird position, and it wasn't good for my back and all of this. And I just remember thinking, I don't know how. And it was really hot as well. Like, he was born at the height of summer, and so it was really unbelievably hot, but I had a good experience. I was very, very lucky. It happened very quickly, and I blinked and he was practically there. I had a lot of gas and air that helped, but yeah,
it's fabulous stuff.
yes it is. But yeah, I'm, you know, maybe that's because I have got Juno like quite prominently in my chart. You see, like I said, I've got Mercury as my chart ruler. I'm Gemini rising, and I've got Juno sandwiched between my Mercury and Venus conjunction, which I think I've got Mercury to Venus at 3, and Juno is like slap bang right in the middle. And you know, I've always felt like I've been protected. I felt like I'm very, very lucky in life. I felt like I've always had some guardian angels around me or something. And you know, it may be that I'm just like a positive person who just views life like that. But I've definitely felt this sort of thing before. I've always felt it. And like I said, I had that experience with childbirth where I was very lucky that it was very quick. It was not painless, but it was, you know, there weren't really any complications. You know, I was just extremely fortunate. You know, the transition into motherhood was much more tricky for me. The actual labor itself was fine, you know. For me the challenge started. That's where it started. Absolutely. What would you say about Juno in the natal chart? You know, you work with it in a mundane respect, but have you thought about it on a personal level? I'm not asking you to go through the signs and the houses, because I think very cookbooky, but you know, is it, what do you think, how do you think she sort of influences the natal chart if she's quite prominently placed?
I think it's very much relationship targeted. It is about our relationships, and that can be, you know, like say marriage, business, friends, any form of relationship, but long-term relationship. And it is very much about what we will tolerate in them, how we negotiate our way through them, navigate the ups and downs, you know, the cyclical nature of those. It's about our rights within a relationship, and it's how we manage them. So it's like, how do you manage finances with your partner? You know, it's about marriage contracts, divorce contracts, You know, Juno will always be present when someone's doing a prenup or something like that.
Oh,
You know,
interesting.
look to Juno for anything contractual. All right. So you want some nice transits from Juno, you know, if you're sort of wanting to sign a contract. But as well, you know, divorce settlements, Juno will be there as well because it's about the practicalities. And it's not just about sort of navigating through relationships. It's about when they end as well and when they start. You know, so any significant times involving relationships, Juno will sort of be there. And you know, obviously, a sign that Juno's in will give you some indication of your view on your rights within a relationship and what you're looking for in a partner. I do think Juno sort of gives us a picture of what type of partner we'd like. You know, if you've got Juno and Leo, because Juno's going into Leo today, isn't it?
Oh yes,
you know,
that's why we
yeah,
met today, wasn't it?
Yeah. You know, you're likely to sort of, I was writing some thoughts about that just before. You know, you're going to enjoy spending a long, committed relationship with, you know, that Leo type person, fun and warm and, you know, generous. Sort of good looking perhaps. But you know, Juno and Leo is going to take you know pride in its relationships. You know, it's something to be proud of and show off. You know, and I was wondering with Juno going into Leo if we might see some like celebrity weddings. You know, those great big flashy Instagrammy type weddings, or even celebrity breakups. I don't know.
There's been so many because of the current Venus retrograde planetary weather. There's just a lot of people that I've seen anyway, not necessarily it is on a celeb level, but also on a non-celeb level, loads of breakups, lots of difficulty.
That's it. And I think Juno in Leo, there's a sense of putting yourself first in a relationship, thinking about what you want and what you need. And I think there's probably less sort of less compromise, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's very much about putting yourself first, I think. But you know, it's definitely about the power dynamics in a relationship. So look to Juno to see, you know, how you navigate them with your other half, or so to speak. But just on a very simple level, it's where you can go to solve problems, find solutions. And like I say, I often just treat Juno like a Mars transit. You know, it can put a load of energy into a situation or whatever part of the natal chart that it's triggering. There's an abundance of energy there to be thrown at it. So I think as well, Juno can be that sort of warning voice that we have in relationships that sometimes we tend to ignore. You know, because we don't want to sort of face the truth necessarily. So we can bury it. But, you know, we always say, just listen to that gut feeling.
Yes.
And I look back to so many situations in my life, and I really do think I should have listened. I wish I had.
Yeah, I think we're all guilty of that, aren't we? We just, you know, sometimes you just don't want to look at that. You just want to put it to one side and deal with it another time. And it just, ultimately, you're only wasting your own time by not addressing it. But, you know, things happen when we're supposed to deal with them. I think,
that's,
you know,
how we learn and
exactly,
learn and grow. But Juno is very much looking at the relationship without those rose tinted glasses. And it's whether we choose to keep them on or take them off, you know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
But yeah, just full of energy. And I think Juno can be a protagonist, a provocateur, a protector. So, you know, all those sorts of things. Great for timings as well. You know, Mars is a good planet for timings. Juno's the same.
Yeah, and I mean, I just while we're talking, I don't want to like digress or whatever, but I just keep being pulled back into the chart, and just seeing Mars opposite Chiron and apexing that T square with Juno, it just sort of reminds me of the kind of the reality of relationships and that dealing with,
I know,
you know, some of the pain and the difficulty that can arise through just being solely in somebody's pocket for a very long period of time. You know, it's just, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you look at, like, you talk about like couple goals, and you see people like maybe like David and Victoria, you know, the Beckhams, and seeing their relationship. Well, it's far from perfect. And I think that they're both given themselves freedom within to do what they need to do. And I think that's part of what makes a relationship really work, is allowing the person to be an individual, you know, and to express themselves. And it's just interesting to see that, you know, just because you're saying, because it's that grand cross, isn't it, really? It's just that it's that feeling of just there's no rest from it, is there, really? It's just constantly balancing. It's like balancing those spinning plates, isn't it? Keeping them spinning all the time.
It is. And I always, you know, when we've got a grand cross, I always imagine a squash court, okay, and the squash ball's just bouncing from wall to wall to wall to wall, and it can't escape. So there's a lot of energy going around, but it's like there's a problem on that wall, there's a problem there's a problem there, and that's what life's like. It's how we just sort of navigate those problems and try not to let them overwhelm us.
Yes.
You know,
yeah.
But I do think that Chiron square, you know, it's in Capricorn. It's to do with the responsibility that comes when you commit long term. There's always that sense of responsibility there as well. And the potential, if we're not careful, that we can lose our autonomy or sense of selves within a relationship. You know, I think Capricorn, one form, you know, it likes to be autonomous and in control and independent, so to speak. It likes to stand alone. And I think there's always that risk in a relationship, especially if it's the wrong relationship, that you can lose that sense of self and that sense.
I feel like it's like if we're talking about from a female or like a feminine perspective, that kind of feminine archetype, I feel like it's sort of reiterated by Lilith in conjunction with Neptune there, because there's a sense of not embracing that fully. You know, there's the wild woman, and then there's the I don't know necessarily about kept woman, but like there's this kind of complicit, like compliant, cooperative, compassionate sort of Juno feel, and then you've got like the kickback and like just has to do her own thing Lilith, and there's a sense of there is an element of sacrifice there, of having to let go of that Lilith in some way. She can be there, but she's just not going to be as I mean, it depends how what your relationship dynamic really is like, because every relationship is different, and it takes all sorts of different ways and all sorts of different people to find their perfect balance. But you know, Lilith is a real kind of she's a bit of a lone wolf, I feel like.
Absolutely.
Really, her true spirit. And with that Neptune there, it's almost like there can be an illusion that you can carry on being that person, but in the long-term relationship, if you carry on being that defiant and that kind of independent to the point that it's you know, it's not really feeding into the relationship, it's just feeding you away, it's pushing you away in a sense.
It is. And it's that when people get settled in a long-term relationship and just become too comfortable, and you know, see so many people go into a relationship and say, "Oh, I'm going to settle down now," and it's like they're locking that Lilith out, aren't they? You know,
but they do call it settling, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. And that's when you become stale and just wear your pajamas all the time and don't put on any makeup, and you just turn into a slob in front of your partner and don't really care. And that's fine if you're comfortable with that. But, you know, you know what I'm getting at. But I think if we just look as well, Chiron is in that square to Saturn.
Yeah.
And there's a very patriarchal feel there, I think. Right. And if you think, you know, Juno's a daughter of Saturn and she's wife of Jupiter. It's very male dominated if we're looking from the myth perspective. And there's almost that sort of, you know, fighting back against that patriarchal sort of control or submitting to it, which it's a lot different now to what it was 50 or 100 years ago, where the man was very much head of the household. It was very,
Yes.
Saturnian. But I do always look at that, and I don't know if I can quite justify this, but I look at that Saturn Chiron, and I always look and think that's the sins of the father. And I don't quite know where I'm going with that, but there's just something there that Juno has perhaps had to tolerate or put up with. And, I think 100 years ago, what wives would tolerate from their husbands when they were, stay-at-home wives, perhaps, and the husband was the breadwinner and what have you. This is what women will tolerate or not tolerate today. It's very, very different. So.
Yeah, very. It's so interesting. I feel like we could just talk. There are more charts that you've sent me.
Let's have a look.
Yes. Okay, so here is Republic of Afghanistan.
Yeah, so this is from 1973, and this is when Afghanistan was a progressive country. Okay, this is when it was run under a one-party system that was led by Daud Khan, I think. And actually, throughout the years, Afghanistan's been incredibly progressive. We're used to the images we see of women being covered up and all the situation with the Taliban. But if we go back to like the 30s and the 50s and 60s and 70s, women got the vote. Women entered into politics. Women were going to university and working in airlines, and it was incredibly progressive. And then we get to 1996, the Taliban took over for the first time, and then 2021. Taliban took over for the second time. All right. But if we quickly look at this chart, which is when, like I say, Afghanistan was still in a progressive phase, we've got Juno there in Sagittarius. All right. So, women were at this point were in universities. All right. They had an awful lot of freedom, and we've got a lovely sextile up to that moon Jupiter in Aquarius at the top of the chart there. That's progressive for the people, isn't it?
Yeah,
they had a lot of rights. They had a lot of freedom. And if we're looking at Juno from a mundane perspective, as people's rights, in Sagittarius, they've got the rights to travel, education, etc., etc. However, Juno's next to Neptune there, isn't it? You do wonder if it's slightly illusory, perhaps, that there's not a huge amount of substance to the rights that the people have, and it's almost like could they be swept away at any time? They're not substantial or set in stone, if that makes sense. And then we've got a yod from Juno to that moon Jupiter conjunction down to that south node in Cancer. Yeah.
Which is where close to where the natal Mars is for Juno's chart anyway, isn't it? She's
very much so,
Cancer,
very much so. And if we think about Afghanistan, it's incredibly tribal. It's really, really tribal, and there's lots of tribal infighting, and the Taliban just happened to be another one of those tribes that arose in the 1990s, and it was, formed from religious students. It was a very Sagittarian thing, the Taliban, and a very patriarchal, tribal system, and they take their own interpretations of the Quran, and sort of try and control women in case it threatens the patriarchal strength of the tribes, etc. And then are we able to do a bi-wheel?
Yeah.
The fall of Kabul on the outside, that would be great.
Yeah.
Lovely. So yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was going to comment on the midheaven just because when you said about 2021, I was like, oh, I'm pretty sure. It's pretty close to the Saturn-Pluto conjunction anyway, but there you go. Look at Pluto on the midheaven there. Wow.
I know, it's crazy. And it's opposite the Afghanistan sun. And it was just a complete overthrow of power. This is when the Taliban took over in 2021 when the West were pulling out. And this is the chart for the moment that the Taliban seized the royal palace and announced on social media that they were now in control.
Wow.
So just, look at Saturn on top of that Jupiter. So as soon as the Taliban took over, the women had to cover up again. All right, from like 2000 onwards, when the sort of West were in there aiding Afghanistan, women were getting more and more freedom. They were back in education. They weren't having to cover up. So Saturn there, right, straight away, we're going to cover up. We're going to repress you and stamp on any freedom that people have. Mostly women, because it's a very patriarchal society, but not just women, lots and lots of people had their rights taken away from them. There was an apartheid started once more against women. And then if we look at Juno, we can see a Juno return in Sagittarius.
Wow.
With that south node in Sagittarius as well. And the south node, to me, it's not a step forward. It's not about progression. It's, a step backwards.
Yeah.
And if you think about the Taliban, it's all about control through religious doctrine, isn't it? That's how they control the people. It's their interpretation of religious doctrine. And what happened as soon as the Taliban took over, they started closing the schools. The universities started getting closed. Women weren't allowed to go to school. They weren't allowed to go to work anymore. It was just a massive, massive step back and another huge apartheid against the freedom of the people, but in particular women. Because let's not forget that, Juno's sextile moon there, which is people, but women as well, isn't it?
Definitely.
So, the rights of the people were taken away, and it was a step back with that south node. And sextile Saturn as well, it was just easy opportunity for the Taliban to do this with that sextile. We all know that, sextiles and trines facilitate things. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing that they facilitate.
Exactly. This is a good example. That was an opportunity. That was a kind of opportunistic moment. And it's like, seize the moment. Regardless of what that could be about, it's reading it as like, oh, this is a really positive time. It's like, well, it doesn't necessarily mean that. It depends what the opportunity is.
Absolutely.
Interesting as well. Look at this. Look, Mercury and Mars would be down here on the sun of Juno's discovery.
Absolutely.
And also opposite that would be the Pluto point that's just opposing as well. So it's a Mars Pluto Mars transit to Juno's Pluto and Sun. That's just
absolutely. And we've got Venus and Virgo, that we've got quite a lot of Virgo going on, and of course the Taliban took over and the country became poverty stricken. There was people starving. I think Virgo can be very frugal, can't it? And it's like a lack of sometimes. And, the people gradually became poorer and poorer. Some of them were selling their children to get money for food.
No way.
And it's ongoing even now, and all the beauty parlors and hairdressers have been shut now. So again, it's just more repression against women. So, and just a massive overthrow of power, without a doubt.
I don't understand. I just have to say, I don't understand why people don't want women to be happy, or like, I can't fathom it, because it's just, they're just part of the creative force of life. Without women, men and women have to work together for the continuation of the species. Like, I don't get it. It just doesn't.
No, we can't understand it in our Western minds, so to speak.
No.
But not just the Taliban, but so many of these Afghanistan tribes, they're so patriarchal. And if women have rights, it threatens their position of power. It's about control and power. It's as simple as that. And it's and there's infighting even between all these tribes. So you know, who's to say that the Taliban will remain in power long term? We don't know. But I was just reading an article on the news last night, I think, that the West still haven't really recognised the Taliban as being, you know, an official political party or rulership. So I think we're going to see a bit of that going on. And what I think a lot of people don't realise is that this takeover came about because of the Doha Agreement, and that was initiated by Donald Trump. And what it was agreement between the Taliban, not the leadership of Afghanistan, it was the Taliban at the time, that the West would withdraw all their troops, withdraw any interference at all from Afghanistan, just leave Afghanistan alone. And in return, the Taliban agreed that they wouldn't commit any acts of violence or terrorism against the West. All right.
Right. Yeah.
So Donald Trump initiated that, but it was Biden who saw it through and oversaw the withdrawal of all the Western troops. I'm sure we can all remember the horrendous scenes from Kabul airport. People were desperately trying to get out and on planes. It was awful. But Biden's Juno is at 6 of Sagittarius.
Wow.
So he completed this Doha agreement, this negotiation between the West and the Taliban.
So the South Node was on his Juno.
Yeah.
At the point of doing this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mad.
And it was such a step backwards for
yeah.
Afghanistan.
Wow.
And their freedom. And of course, what we've had pretty much of a media blackout from Afghanistan. We're not seeing a lot.
No, nothing.
No, and it's very sad. There's not much in the way of messaging coming out. And I remember actually when we go back to the first Taliban takeover in '96, Pluto was approaching the 1973 Juno, Neptune there. I'm sure it was. In 1998, I think. Is that right?
Where would it be? Sorry, Pluto would have been.
Yeah, in 1998, I'm sure it hit.
Yes.
Juno there. Yeah.
It would have been in Scorpio. Yes.
And then
so
it went
on its way.
Yeah. Well, it hit Juno, and there was a massive media blackout from Afghanistan. All the people had to get rid of their TV sets, their video recorders, their satellite.
In 1998, is that?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
When Pluto hit that Juno.
Oh, wow.
This is Sagittarius. You know, it's picking
but
up.
Also, yeah, it's with that Neptune, isn't it? There's like that kind of ability to like go viral, that infiltration, and it's like closed down completely.
It's like Jupiter's fog again, isn't it? We'll just cover everything up and hide what's going on in the Western world, and it's really sad though, incredibly sad.
Very. I mean, I have to put my hands up and say I haven't really done any kind of like research into it, and if I'm honest, sometimes I find stuff like this in the news just like it makes me very, very feel helpless and like unhappy. So I tend to bury my head in the sand a bit with some of these things, because I just function better if it's horrible, isn't it, to admit that I'm just basically pleading ignorance here.
No, not at all.
But I find it so sad.
I totally understand, and I'm at the point now where I'm trying to limit how much news I watch, because it's just I'm full of anger about the UK government, the Conservatives. Where do I start there? And then, you know, this is overwhelming. There's so much that's overwhelming in the news, and I think we do need to put up some boundaries, definitely. Yeah,
it's something that I have to do for my mental health, basically. So I dip in and out, and I get people tell me certain things, and then if there's anything I want to go deeper with, I'll do that, but I tend to try to avoid it as much as possible. But I just looking at this, there's two things here that I find interesting, and I'm just interested in galactic center point. I just always leave it there just because I think it's interesting to look at. But Lilith is right up there with galactic center, and yes, it's not exactly a conjunction, but like hanging around quite close to the North Node, that sort of when you were talking about progressive, I would say that in a sense, you know, Lilith is a progressive point in the chart to an extent. You know, and what you were describing before sounded like there was very much a very, like you said, progressive, a sort of positive, forward thinking, and I don't know what the word is, but just like a way of living where women don't have to feel like they have to make excuses for themselves. They are just who they are, and, you know, unapologetically existing. And, you know, this whole South Node to Juno just completely has vacuumed that up, basically, you know. And it's also interesting that this is the natal placement here. You've got the Lilith and galactic center, and opposite that is Saturn, and then square that is transiting Venus at 29 Virgo. There's like a with galactic center, I feel like it's, if there's any planets in contact, if there's anything going on, it's almost like it's plugged into this kind of central cosmic energy that is just very, it's like a channel, it's like a raw channel of expression, to be really, really inarticulate about it. And whenever I see like something like Lilith, it's almost like it's been plugged in on steroids. And so you get this kind of like, not necessarily an exaggerated expression, but it's like there's this kind of, it has to be experienced on behalf of the collective. Like we have to experience this in a really big way.
Yeah.
And you know, to have this kind of opposition in the chart, there's this sort of, I guess there's this balancing act of like the control but the freedom at the same time. You know, with Saturn in Gemini, there's this like, you know, responsibility about having options, and you know, sort of, it's quite refined in you know, the way that it processes and articulates itself. But actually here, you know, with Lilith on galactic center, it just feels like this opposition with Saturn. There's a kind of a seesaw, tug of war, whatever you want to call it, between you know, the masculine and the feminine principles. And looking at, you know, not being afraid to embrace that sort of more shadow side. We say shadow side, is it really shadow side to let women be who they want to be? But, you know, there is that shadow feminine with Lilith, but there's this kind of like to and fro, and it feels like a bit of a seesaw and a kind of a game of balance in a sense. But to have Venus here completing this sort of T-square, it's like throwing it off balance, you know. You know, it's that kind of you know, it's emphasizing the where we have to, and Virgo is not necessarily about sacrifice, but it's definitely about playing things down. It's not very ego driven, it's very, as you were saying before, you know, it's definitely you know, they want to be of service and they want to help other people, but sometimes at the detriment of themselves. And so when you've got Venus here, it's not placing a lot of value on themselves. It's definitely quite humble and playing it down, isn't it?
I think it's a devaluing of the feminine principle.
Yes, it
and
feels
that's
like
exactly what we saw, and a dumbing down and a devaluing of women's freedom. You know, and you know, the right to be themselves. You know, that Lilith energy up there. So yeah, it's just so sad.
So interesting. And yeah, very horrible. And my previous life, I used to work in immigration as well. It was a job that I had to leave because I just wasn't cut out for that kind of it was hard, harsh, emotionally difficult work to do. So yeah, thanks for sharing that with us. That's really, really interesting and actually quite moving as well. So
and again, the story's very obvious, isn't it? Very clear story.
And interesting that it could happen in this day and age as well, really. So in such recent years,
I know
that this stuff's going on. So you had a couple of other charts, didn't you?
Yeah, if you want to look at Taiwan, okay. Super. So completely different here. We've got Juno sandwiched in between the two benefics in the second house. And Taiwan is a very democratic country, and religious freedom is highly, highly valued. Okay,
Yeah.
so people's right to religious freedom is one of the big things in Taiwan. And we
Yeah.
can see the second house there. We've got Juno, Jupiter, Sagittarius. There's such a religious theme there, isn't it? And
Yes.
it's next to Venus. It's so valued. And it's not just religious freedom, it's educational freedom. They've got a great education system, which is very based on giving people socio-economic skills.
Mm.
So really encouraging them to sort of come out with those skills that will help them make money. And you know, we've got Venus in Scorpio there as well in the second house.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, and it's about diversity as well. You know, diversity is very much valued in Taiwan, very different. And then if you want to flip the China chart on, in contrast, so straight away we can see a completely different Juno going on.
Oh
Okay,
yeah. Yeah.
so it's in conjunct the moon, the people of China, and it's pretty close to Saturn in Virgo there. Um,
Mm.
there's a lot less freedom for the people of China. They're much more controlled, aren't they?
Yeah.
And I think that Juno Saturn looks a bit sterile sat there in Virgo
Mm.
almost. And if you think about I know that it's been relaxed now, but it used to have that one child family policy, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
I do think the in conjunct to the moon and with Saturn close by as well, I think that describes that.
Look at
Um,
this. Just seen that at 22 degrees Capricorn.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's,
That's interesting.
there's all sorts going on in China, but we don't see a lot of it. They just let us see what they want us to see, I think. You know,
Yeah.
communications that are very, very controlled. And, you know, we're in Virgo, it's Mercury ruled there. And the moon's in Aquarius, which is an air sign about communication as well. And you know, their social media is incredibly controlled and monitored
Yeah.
in
It's
China. It's
interesting.
like Big
Very
Brother's
interesting.
watching you. Yeah. So you know, the Chinese people certainly don't have the rights of the same rights as the Taiwanese people or sort of
Mm.
Western countries. But I think as well, it's you know, Juno's in the seventh house. Yeah, you could almost put it in the eighth there, couldn't you? Really. Um,
Yes. Yeah. It's right
yeah,
on the cusp there, isn't it?
yeah, you know, and China very much likes to control its relations with other countries. You know, it's. I'm trying to think of the word. It's, you know, they've got to have this sort of really sort of Virgo-y, you know, controlling every single aspect of their
Yes.
trade relations, their,
Yes.
you know, their just foreign relations in general, and their obviously their financial relations. And Juno, of course.
Fastidiously managed.
Absolutely, absolutely, you know. Um, it just feels very sterile. And I looked there and I always think of these Chinese factory workers and these lines like little automatons, you know, robots.
I
Um,
read a book literally on the day of the Saturn Pluto conjunction, almost exactly at the time that the conjunction happened. I was just getting in my car to go on a long journey, so I started playing an audiobook called Wild Swans. I don't know if you've ever read it, but I would highly recommend that you do. Highly recommend it. It's a book about 3 generations of women living in China,
wow.
and you know, living through various types of dictatorship, basically. And you know, them thinking that when the Russians arrived that everything was going to be saved, and then realizing that you know, that it was possibly even worse than the way it was before. And you know, it's just it's fascinating from the word go. I mean, there are points in their book that are really hard to listen
Yeah.
to, but I think you particularly would find it a very, very interesting read. It's a quite a long, it's a big book, and I think it's about, if you're listening, about 26 hours long.
Wow.
But it is honestly brilliant, and I'm really getting a feeling here that Juno is probably going to be quite an interesting one, because the political situations that they had going on, and I'm like not very good at remembering certain things. Some things I'm great at remembering, but when it comes to like dates and political things, I'm not brilliant. But it's very interesting because it's very much about like communism and you know, the way that things are, information is controlled. I think at one point they realized they were told by the soldiers, or told like by the politicians, they had to save up all the flies that they found, and then they'd have to give them to the soldiers, and they realized that they were saving up these jars of flies, dead flies, and the soldiers were eating them because there was no food. And then they knew they were in trouble because the soldiers were eating the flies that they were collecting because there wasn't even any food for them. And then they were like, okay, we are in big trouble. Like, we are in a very serious situation here. Like, oh, it's bad enough, but like, you know, for there to be such a lack of food that's what they're eating. And it is really mind-blowing like that, because it's her mum and her grandmother, and just the 3 generations, what they had to live through. It's beautiful, but it's like harrowingly painful at the same time. I won't give you any spoilers, but I just would say definitely it's such an interesting book, and I think based on your area of interest, I think you'd find some really interesting stuff in there. She even gives dates for like birth dates and stuff that you could even look at her chart. And
that would be brilliant.
I was on the go always listening to that book, and I'd think, oh, I'll remember and go back, and I never do.
I know.
So I didn't make any notes, but yeah, I feel like maybe this might be something that you would be interested in exploring. Definitely. Particularly looking at this chart as well. So I'm looking at that Virgo as well, and the work ethic, the Chinese work ethic, you know, and long hours that the children go to school for, you know, their school days are so much longer than ours, and it's work. And also, it's like a very different like perspective, or a very different way that the brain works, in the sense that like in the Western world, I know that I've had trouble myself personally. I'm not a very number bod person, but there's a really, I don't know if it's a good, I've learned Chinese multiplication, which I can actually do long multiplication that way rather than the way that they teach in the schools over here. I don't know if it's the way that they teach certain subjects that you know, it works better. It definitely does for me, having learned Chinese multiplication, but there seems to be a more logical, or just a much better way of educating, in a sense, like in a much more organizing the information in a way that it's much more digestible. Because I know that some of the ways that they teach in definitely where I went to school, I look at the way that they do it, and for my brain, which is definitely not neurotypical, I just some of it I could not integrate it, whereas I look at other ways of doing it that are definitely not the way that they teach over here, and I just think, why don't they do it like that over here? So it can be about you know, having a completely different mindset and approach, that way of sort of seeing the world, you know, engaging with reality as well, you know. Very structured, isn't it? Very structured and regimented, and methodical. So, and nice little Mars Pluto there for you. Not that it's a controlling country at all. Oh no, definitely not. Very interesting. I hope you do get around to listening to Wild Swans or that would be great. Yes. So that's been really interesting. I don't know if was there any other charts, or was that it? Just one, actually. If that's all right, that we can look at quickly. That's a person, that's Aung San Suu Kyi. I can't pronounce it properly. There we go. This is fascinating. There we go. We've got Juno there with Pluto. So who is this person? So she was is the, you know, Burmese political leader, activist, and she spent, I don't know, about 15 years under house arrest. You know, Burma's got quite a sort of military, brutal regime, and she's fought for human rights in Burma for most of her life, if not political life. So she was a political prisoner, basically, and, you know, there was military coups going on all the time in Burma.
but essentially, she won the Nobel Peace Prize, and she's also won prizes for freedom of thought, things like that. But basically, she just fights and fights for human rights. And I just think that Juno, when we're talking about people's rights, whether personal, collective, whatever, sort of conjunct that Pluto, and obviously square Mars there as well, describes the military situations that she went through, being a political prisoner. And we don't have a time of birth here, so we can't look at the houses. I wouldn't be surprised if she's got a strong 12th house going on there, or 4th house even, because she was under house arrest for so many years.
Yeah.
I just look and think there's a dogged fight and determination there with that Juno Pluto square, Venus and Mars, that passionate fight for people's value, people's rights for freedom. Very, very strong statement. And she just never gave up. You know, she's got that Juno in that fixed square there with Mars and Pluto. She was never going to give up fighting for not only her own freedom, but people's rights.
So is there, like, with Juno, I mean, we're looking at Juno here with a Mars Pluto square involved, but would you say, just as a general quality, she's quite unrelenting?
Absolutely. Especially when she's, in a fixed situation like that. I don't think Juno in Pisces perhaps would fit this, would it? Although you could argue that Juno and Pisces would fight for the underdog or some collective cause, perhaps. But this is an absolute dogged fight, without a doubt. And imagine tolerating being under house arrest so long. In fixed squares like that, they do tolerate things. They do put up with situations.
Sometimes it can be a lack of understanding how to get yourself out of that situation. I know with fixity, it's like you really do feel stuck. Like it really feels like there is no way out. And it can just take a moment, a little window where you see a new way of doing something. But yes, with Juno, I suppose there's this ability to commit to something. And so, with the fixed signs being, there is a sense of commitment with them. It sort of comes as part of the territory with fixity. But having Juno involved with that, there's this kind of the undying cause, really, isn't it? It's like fighting to the death.
It is, absolutely, because I think Pluto can be do or die, and it does fight to the death here, and it's a power battle as well, against the regime. And I think that square very much describes like the regime she was fighting against. But it's really a lifelong battle, but a lifelong vocation as well. But just winning the Nobel Peace Prize with that fight, I think it just shows Juno, wanting that sense of fairness for whatever it's involved in, whether it's a collective cause like a nation's rights, or just that and she I think she lost her husband. I think her husband was either killed or murdered as well, and I think this square's a little bit brutal like that as well, isn't it? It does feel quite brutal.
But it's like, we've got lots going on in Cancer, we've got lots going on in Libra, so there's this like feminine like energy is, and like with Taurus as well, there's just like a lot of feminine stuff going on, like that feminine fight, and highlighting that energy. Really,
it's a female leader, leading the way, and sort of this is someone who wants to be in control, but for the right reasons.
So what's the Juno that's the warrior Juno? What's her name? I can't.
Juno Sospita, I think. Is it Juno Sospita? No, Juno Curitis. She's like the Aryan Juno with the sword and the shield, and you know, but we've also got Juno Sospita, who, you know, is the protector of the home and the people and the land, and you know, so that's quite a, you know, more than
that feels like the home and the land energy right there, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
And then here comes the warrior.
Absolutely, this female warrior, without a doubt. I think that Saturn Cancer as well describes the house arrest. You know, being confined to the house for so many years.
But not for a positive, like not for, you know, this ultimately has its end result, or what comes from it is, you know, a progressive sort of action is taken. Yeah, so it feels like, regardless of, you know, the suffering that one, it's almost like the sacrifice of one individual for the greater good, basically.
It is very much, and it's incredibly patriotic. Cancer's very patriotic, I think. It's just doing this for the good of her country.
Definitely.
Yeah,
very, very interesting stuff. And I really feel like just going through these charts and looking at the discovery chart of Juno and talking about the mythology has really like educated me. I feel like I could look at a chart now and really get a sense of what Juno could mean for somebody. So I really appreciate the class and the amount of time you've taken to do this, because it's really, really fascinating. Do you so are you teaching Juno at the Mayo School, or what sort of stuff do you do there?
Not at the moment. I cover the entire syllabus when and as required, and we've in the past year or so introduced a lecture on dwarf planets. So I do the dwarf planets as well.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with them too. So, but I don't see any reason why Juno might not get introduced, you know, in the future. So, but you know, I've been collecting this information for the past few years. So, like I say, I'm trying to build a database or resource or something, just to like open Juno up. And it's not just about, you know, the perfect long-term partner, which is the generic sort of explanation for Juno, isn't it? There's so much more. There's so much more to Juno. Definitely.
Thank you. Well, where can people contact you if they want to come for a reading or get in touch with you for some classes? Or
so I've got my website, which is just liannemccafferty.com. In fact, just type my name into the internet and it'll just sort of take you there. And then I've got all my contact details on there. But I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Threads, I'm on LinkedIn, I think. And I'm trying to put a bit more effort into the social media presence.
And if you'd like to be in with a chance of winning a gorgeous Monk's Astrology personalised birth chart or birth chart clock, all you have to do is subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you have a private channel, screenshot your subscription and email it. And if you just include your YouTube handle as well, so tell me what your channel's called, just so that if for whatever reason, you know, I do pull your name out the hat, I can hunt you down in a few different ways to let you know you've won this beautiful clock made by the very talented Catherine Monks, who creates a variety of bespoke and personalized astrological ornamental artwork, and it really is truly stunning.
I hope you enjoyed it anyway. It was lovely to sort of really sort of thrash it out and just see where the conversation went.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I really enjoyed it. I'm sure that the listeners and the viewers on YouTube have too. And I think it would be great to get you back at some point. Maybe we could talk about dwarf planets.
Definitely, it's a date.
Thank you.